Yeah, okay. Well, this is gonna hurt like a mother.
A guilty pleasure is something that is generally thought of as something that one enjoys despite being aware of its faults and distaste to others, thus bringing them a sense of shame for liking it. When the legendary band Journey was inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in 2017, the man chosen for the role of inducting them was Pat Monahan, the lead singer of the not quite so legendary band Train. In his speech, he said the following: "I don't believe in guilty pleasures. You either love something or you don't, and I love this band." Now, whilst also being sort of a backhanded thing to bring up something's potential status as a guilty pleasure at the same time you are honoring it with a lifetime achievement, I get what he's trying to say, and I do agree. So, I must acknowledge my wholehearted and never-ending love for the subject of today's episode before I do what must be done. While I was laying the foundations for this channel, I came up with a list of 10 films that was to basically be season 1 of the real story, if you will. And while plans have shifted here and there, and that list has altered and shifted orders over the course of the last year, one constant thing has always remained. One movie on this list has been what I've been looking forward to diving into most because it's been a literal lifelong favorite and I just knew it was going to be a blast. But as I've gotten closer and closer to it, it has sort of begun to take on a white whale status for me as something I had better fucking nail or regret indefinitely. But to celebrate the upcoming 35th anniversary of its release on February 26th, it is finally time to talk Bloodsport.
I'm ready.
In the fall of 1980, a United States Marine named Frank Dukes authored 2 articles that would end up making the September and October issues of Black Belt magazine, the premier and most well-known martial arts publication at the time, with hands down the best covers of all time. The credibility from these articles and goodwill it brought allowed Dukes to get the ear of Black Belt editor Jon Stewart, and with it he began to weave a fascinating tale of his supposed real-life exploits as the grand champion of an underground fighting tournament organized in secret every 5 years to pit the best of the best from across the globe against one another. This story would become the subject of a November 1980 Black Belt article entitled Kumite, A Learning Experience, and from here it would snowball into a Hollywood movie that is still a pop culture icon and an unknown inspiration for a great number of things we know today. It would also garner both fame and infamy for Frank Dukes, as he would become a renowned name in the martial arts community, for better and for worse. Dukes' claims and his ego grew more and more grandiose until he became the focal point of not only detractors drawing the attention to serious holes in his stories, but also multiple ugly lawsuits and eventually a polarizing argument about whether or not this man was nothing more than an incredibly skilled con artist. Well, real ones, like Joey Chestnut agonizingly sucking down his 70th hot dog and water-soaked bun, after months of consuming breakdowns, articles, and interviews from the man himself, I am finally ready to assume the undertaking of bringing you the entire Frank Dukes story. The good, the bad, and the complete bullshit. This is the real story behind Bloodsport. And make sure if you haven't already to punch that subscribe button right in the dick.
We honor your invitation.
No shit, you honor his invitation.
It really helps out a lot. Thanks. So when the movie begins, we get the first of the glorious montages it is going to give us, and it's going to give us a lot of them. But this one shows us the organizers of the tournament, the Black Dragon Fighting Society, setting various things up for the upcoming Kumite. More on them later, and interspliced with it is our fighters doing various impressive feats of badassery. We got Chinese Hercules breaking some huge ice blocks, this guy doing some slightly less impressive board breaking, this dude fucking Spider-Manning into a tree and breaking coconuts. You got these guys play fighting around in their grandma's living room. Bit underwhelming if I'm honest, but okay. Sumo Giant bullying a couple of his friends. This guy winning Jungle Fight Club. Wait, where have I seen this guy before? He looks vaguely familiar. It'll come to me. And this is where we first meet one of the greatest characters in the history of charactering, Ray Jackson.
I love anything with full contact. Need a few more scars on my face.
I heard you can get killed at that Kumite.
Only if you fuck up. Who the hell are these two scumbags? Hey, you better stop doing that stuff. You might want to have kids one of these days.
Okay, USA. USA.
Ray is a walking catchphrase, as you will come to find out if you've never seen this movie, because you could essentially print anything he says in the movie on a shirt and I'd buy it. I did, in fact. We'll circle back to him though many times, don't you worry.
Whoa, yeah!
Anyway, this is where we are first introduced to Frank, where he evades the military escort assigned to bring him into his superior, as they have somehow heard of his intentions to compete in the Kumite and plan on not allowing him to do so since he is apparently too valuable an asset. Frank is officially declared AWOL, and a pair of military police officers are put on the case to bring him back before any harm can come to him. Before Frank departs for Hong Kong, however, he makes one final stop to see his mentor and Shidoshi, who is quite literally on his deathbed. And now we're going to have ourselves a little flashback. However, whereas Frank is going to stop in his teenage years, I want to go back a little bit further. I want to go all the way back to April 6th, 1956, when on an early spring day in Toronto, Ontario, Canada, Frank William Dukes was born to Holocaust survivors Alfred and Margaret Dukes. Now, before we go literally any further, it's necessary to clarify something. Nearly every aspect of Frank's life has been put under scrutiny, and for decades now, he has had several folks both detracting and corroborating the recounts he has given over the course of his career in the public. But he has also done himself no favors in this department by giving conflicting information regarding subjects over the years, especially in regards to changing parts of his stories when challenged with evidence to the contrary. So as we work our way chronologically through his life, I will do my best to present all information we know and do my best to surmise what I think the most likely truth might be. And I want to be clear as well that I am really doing my best to keep my mind open to all possible explanations. Trust me, nobody wants this story to be true more than me. Well, except of course maybe Frank Dukes. Anyway, back to the flashback. In January of 1964, when Frank was 7, the Dukes family moved to the San Fernando Valley in California. By Frank's account, he grew up very poor, with his family even being unable to provide him shoes without holes in them, and this made him the target of frequent harassment from other kids from the more well-off families. It is worth mentioning that his father worked on planes at Burbank Airport, and Frank also has a brother that later attended USC, so it's possible they just came up and Frank is just highlighting when they were struggling, but I digress. According to Frank, he was a quote-unquote crybaby with no confidence growing up, and that if you said boo to him, he would run in the opposite direction. This was until he discovered his love for martial arts. Having been enamored with the character of James Bond in his youth, remember that, it may just come up later, as Frank remembers it, he wanted to get into martial arts because he was inspired by the secret agent's aptitude for hand-to-hand combat and his ability to handle people physically. However, this was way before the days of MMA gyms being all over the world and 1 in 3 young adult men you know earning belts in hipster jitsu. This was back in the days when if you wanted to learn how to fight, it was all karate dojos and instructional books or videos.
Gonna bounce his head on the table 10 times or something. Don't you ever do this. She tried to kill me, so I gotta return the favor.
Karate is not to be used aggressively. But if I have no other choice.
Luckily for him, during the 60s and 70s, the Valley was home to a great number of burgeoning dojos with founders that brought secrets directly from Asia to the mainland United States and would go on to become some of the biggest names in the martial arts world. From Valley OG Bob Osman's first Isshin-Ryu dojo in Sherman Oaks, to Kenpo and Kajukenpo pioneers Bill Ryusake and John Leone's schools down the road from each other in North Hollywood, to Hapkido Grandmaster Bong Soo-han in Santa Monica, just to name a few. And it was due to this that it quickly gained a reputation and the nickname, the Valley of Champions. So all that stuff you see in the Karate Kid and Cobra Kai about martial arts being a huge deal in the Valley, there is some real truth to that. Anyway, coming from a poor upbringing, Frank was unable to take formal lessons in many of these places.
One of the things that I think made me the godfather of mixed martial arts is I was too poor in those days to afford formal martial art lessons. And in those days, if you went and did Shotokan, that's all you could do. Or you did jiu-jitsu, that's all you could do. Your masters didn't want you to cross-train. And because I was poor, I would go from school to school to school, and I would be outside on the sidewalk. In fact, Bill Ryusake, who was sidekick to Bruce Lee, very famous, would often raise his blinds because he knew I'd be out there and make sure I got my lesson, and I would practice right there on the sidewalk.
Wow. Now, keep that Godfather of MMA claim in mind too. We're definitely coming back to that. However, the man who he is referring to in that clip, Bill Ryusaki, did somewhat corroborate this in a way in a later interview, saying, "I don't know whether it was because he couldn't pay or what it was, but many times he would come out in front of my window and I would see him looking in." So, as you can see, there is a kernel of truth in that story. But then Frank goes and doubles down with the very next thing he says in that previous interview.
When he was getting an award one day, I was the actual person he asked to present him with it, which was a great honor for me, because here's a guy who helped, instill in me a whole new etiquette, a whole new way of thinking.
Which, as far as my research dictates, Frank Dux never presented Bill Ryusaki with any prestigious award that he ever received over his career. And that will sort of become a bit of a pattern, a story that begins with kernels of truth and ends with Frank trying the old popcorn trick. For different reasons, the timeline of events on these early years is a bit hazy, but the major defining year as far as Frank's formal martial arts training and his development into the man who he would become would be when Frank turned 13. The year is 1969. It's the World Teams Championship in Pasadena, California. In one corner is multiple-time former world karate champion and owner of an impressive over 6-year unbeaten streak in head-to-head matches, Mike Stone. In the other is 23-year-old upstart Vic Moore, one of the first African Americans ever to win a major karate competition, trained by the godfather of American karate, Robert Trias, holder of victories over the likes of Chuck Norris and Joe Louis, a future pioneer of American kickboxing. After a hard-fought battle, Moore defeats Stone in a dramatic upset, and as Vic Moore is celebrating his victory, that is when he's confronted with his real test that day, in the form of apparently the most imposing 13-year-old of all time, Frank Dux. Legend has it, Dux approached Moore, and after a brief exchange about having to fight the best to be the best, Frank struck him in the nose, and after a 15-minute scrap with neither man nor adolescent being able to get the upper hand, a draw was reconciled between the two. Dux also claims that the two would meet again a couple of years later and fight to another draw. Now, as far as those claims are concerned, when Vic Moore has been asked about them in the past, he is given conflicting stories as well. In the 2012 film made about Frank titled Put Up Your Dukes, great name, there is a portion where Vic seems to maybe not exactly corroborate everything that Frank is saying, but at the very least he's not denying it.
This is the man who made me. This is the man who made me. I cut my teeth on this. And this guy beat everybody. Yeah. Everybody. Bill Wallace, Mike Stone, Chuck Norris.
You name him?
Yep.
Mike Foster.
Skipper Mullins.
Yes.
And he gave me a shot when I was like 13 years old, and then again at 17.
Yeah.
So, cut my teeth on with this guy.
Hello, darkness, my old friend.
However, nowadays, including most recently in an interview Vic gave to the channel Viking Samurai, he denies having ever had an actual fight with Frank. And just real quick, big shout out to Viking Samurai. He has interviewed not only Frank, but a great number of both his supporters and detractors, and he really does an amazing job of coming at it from this neutral point of view and giving a platform to both sides to try to find some truth to all of this. I used some info gathered during these interviews for parts of this, and so I just want to give him a special thank you for that. Anyway, my best guess as to the reason for these conflicting stories is partially that Frank had gained such a cult following by this point that Vic himself gained more notoriety by the story, and it wasn't as if he had to admit to a defeat. Sort of the best of both worlds there. Also, I think there was a bit of a quid pro quo going on between the two at the time, as Frank was in return willing to lend credence to a dubious claim that Vic had been making for years as well at this point. Vic Moore once famously participated in a speed demonstration with the legendary Bruce Lee, where he was attempting to show that he could block Lee's lightning-quick charging strikes, and let's just say accounts differ on how things transpired. The version most people know, and the one that has been confirmed by those in attendance and by existing footage of that day, is that Bruce was able to narrowly successfully strike Vic both times he attempted. However, Vic Moore insists that there is additional footage out there that shows a whole different side of that day, that he not only blocked the strikes, but that he was able to land some of his own strikes against the legend, but that this footage was buried to preserve the star that Bruce Lee was cultivating at that time. Whatever the case, as far as whether or not I believe a 13-year-old kid whose only training to that point was mimicking moves he saw through karate dojo windows fought to any sort of a draw with a 23-year-old multi-time world champion with a direct lineage to one of the most important figures in American martial arts history, and this supposedly happened after a major championship event, and there's coincidentally no real evidence to prove it, I'll let my esteemed co-counsel take this one.
You liar!
Anyhow, it was apparently the fallout from this fight that would set Frank on the course to meet the man who would teach him the ways of the ninja, and whose living room we are still flashbacking in, Senzo Tiger Tanaka. Now, Senzo Tanaka, and the question of whether he actually ever really existed, has become one of the most researched and debated topics in the entire Frank Dux mythos, and for good reason, as there is some fascinating stuff there. But let's just start with the way these two came together originally, as there is seemingly two slightly different versions of it. One version of the tale is that the notoriety from the fight with Vic Moore got the attention of jiu-jitsu master Sanzo Jack Seki, and that he would become Frank's first formal O-sensei. Jack Seki was born an American, but had spent the early years of his life in Japan studying with not only his father, who was also a jiu-jitsu master, but also spending time with the founder of modern judo, Dr. Jigoro Kano. Seki emigrated back to the United States when World War II broke out, and according to Frank, was an extended Tanaka family member, and that it was through him that Frank became acquainted with Senzo Tanaka. However, another version of the story Frank has given is that he was discovered by Senzo at a jiu-jitsu tournament, which would check out, but then goes on to say that this was after he had gone to see the Black Dragons in Chicago, insinuating that the Vic Moore fight was a bit of a tryout, so to speak, and stating that his invitation to train with Tanaka came as a favor to guys such as John Keane, who was the founder of the Black Dragon Fighting Society operating out of Chicago. But if you were at all familiar with John Keane, you probably know him better by his moniker, Count Dante. To be completely honest, guys, I could spend the length of another entire video delving into the Black Dragon Fighting Society and the fever dream that was John Keane, aka Count Raphael Dante's existence on this planet, but I want to give you the abridged version of it because it holds what I believe to be some interesting clues to the Frank Dux puzzle. First of all, the original Black Dragon Fighting Society, or the Kokorukai, started as a paramilitary group and unofficial propaganda and special operations extension of the Japanese Imperial Army. These guys were martial artists, and the use of the Kumite, or free fighting, or sparring as we know it, was used as a method of testing a member's fighting ability versus another. According to Frank Dux, Senzo Tanaka was a member of this version of the Black Dragons and was a Kumite champion. The group was officially disbanded in 1946 by the American occupation authorities, though some insist that fragments of it still exist in other areas of the world. Where the Chicago version factors in is where we circle back to John Keane. Keane had spent some time in the Marines, and like many Americans in the 50s, had become hugely enamored with the world of exotic Asian martial arts. He spent some time training under aforementioned karate godfather Robert Trias when he opened his first school in Arizona, and quickly moved up the ranks, both literally and figuratively. It wasn't long before Keane became a focal point of Trias' expansion plans, and soon the two were running an organization called the United States Karate Association, with Keane as the group's Midwest representative. At the time, Keane was in his early 20s, brash, and full of wild stories such as being a guerrilla fighting in the mountains of the Cuban Revolution. He was also much more interested in the dramatic and flashier aspects of martial arts, and so he began organizing tournaments at places like the University of Illinois Fieldhouse as a way to draw bigger audiences. This ran in direct opposition to Bob Trias' idea for his burgeoning organization, and so after a falling out, Keane was expelled from the USKA in December of 1964. Free to now do as he pleased, Keane really began to go off the rails here, and this is where he forms the Chicago chapter of the Black Dragons, naming it as an homage to Senzo Tanaka, according to Frank Dux, but in all reality having absolutely nothing to do with the original group. In 1965, Keane is arrested and given probation for attempting to blow out a rival dojo's window with a dynamite cap. Also at this time, he famously bought a lion cub, which was still somehow legal at this time, and walked it around Lake Michigan like a dog. In 1967, he officially changed his name to Count Juan Rafael Dante, predicated on reclaiming some apparent royal title that his relatives abandoned during the Spanish Civil War or something. He began the first of his many side hustles in addition to being a karate master, opening a salon and becoming a hairdresser. No, I am not making any of this up. And that same year, he authored what would become an infamous publication in the annals of martial arts history, World's Deadliest Fighting Secrets, containing secrets inspired by Kung Fu Dim Mak or poison hand strikes. Secrets such as being able to strike a man, leave no outside mark, but have him die days later from his injuries. And if this is sounding familiar, yeah, it fucking should be. Anyway, this pamphlet was highly advertised in comic books and the like, and Count Dante, the deadliest man who ever lived, became a very rich but very scrutinized character. All the while, he still organized what he described as full-contact martial arts tournaments, though some described as looking like nothing more than amateur boxing tournaments. And Dante became a central figure in the Chicago Dojo Wars, leading to an infamous altercation on the night of April 24, 1970. Dante and a group of his students, dressed as police officers, ended a dojo storm on rival Green Dragon Society's Black Cobra Hall, attacking several of its students. It's unknown what exactly the source of the conflict was, but when it was all over, Count Dante's friend and top student, Jim Konovic, had been stabbed through the stomach with a sword and died on the sidewalk outside while they attempted to flee. The man who did the stabbing, 20-year-old Jerome Greenwald, was charged with murder, but Dante got off on aggravated assault charges as it was expected his lawyer had ties to the criminal underworld. Dante's reputation, however, was tarnished beyond repair, and his later years were spent hawking porno magazines, spiraling into a mix of alcohol and pills, running afoul of real Chicago gangsters, and being questioned by the state's attorney about his role in a possible heist of more than $4 million from the headquarters of the Purelator Secretary in late 1974. He would die at the age of 36 in his apartment on May 25, 1975, due to complications from bleeding ulcers brought on by his harsh lifestyle. Frank Dux claims that Dante was set to be the original representative sent for the Kumite, but that Dux assumed that position when he passed away in 1975, which is just so convenient. Also, maybe I am reaching just a little bit, but it sure seems to me like the character of John Kreese from the Karate Kid franchise borrows some key aspects of the original John Keaton, and now I desperately want to see a hairdresser John Kreese. But we've left poor Van Damme in limbo long enough. Let's catch back up to Frank's flashback as we see the movie's version of his first meeting of his mentor. Teenage Frank and two of his friends break into the Tanaka living room and attempt to steal the family katana sword. Now, the joke has already been made about Frank rocking a San Francisco baseball Giants hat with a New York football Giants jersey, and so he must just be a fan of Giants in general. I'm going to go a different route and give them the benefit of the doubt that maybe this is just a small nod to how poor Frank evidently was growing up, and that maybe his family had to just scrape any Giants swag together that they could. Anyway, Frank's friends wisely bail when they hear people coming, but Frank lollygags like a fucking goon and gets caught. He is essentially blackmailed into training with Senzo and brought on to act as a proverbial punching bag for his son Shingo. According to Frank, the real training sessions were held with Senzo's nephews rather than his son, but that the beatings he incurred are very authentic to how they are portrayed in the movie. Additionally, he says that the bit about breaking into the Tanaka house to steal the katana sword is also fiction and a work of Hollywood. Let's be clear. Frank Dux has been accused of being many things: a liar, a snake oil salesman, a con artist, a wannabe, a self-owner of mythical proportions, but he's certainly no thief. Anyway, it was during these ass-kickings that Frank said he first heard about the existence of the underground fighting tournament known as the Kumite, rather than being awkwardly told about it after saving Shingo from an ass-kicking.
Someday, I'll fight in the Kumite and make my father proud.
At age 16, Frank says he traveled with Senzo to Masuda, Japan as part of his final ninjutsu training. This is what I think the later training montages after Shingo dies in the movie are supposed to symbolize, including, of course, the classic blind tea party portion of every Grandmaster's teachings. I was unable to find anything that supported that Frank had to convince Senzo to continue training him for any reason, since Shingo did not really exist. All of the stories have Frank continuing as a faithful student for another 3 years, until Tanaka passed away in 1975, which brings us back to the current timeline, as movie Frank goes to pay his respects to his Shidoshi before he dies, and promises to win the Kumite to honor him. In the movie, it appears that Senzo gets all the glory for training Frank into the martial artist that he became, but in recent years' interviews, Frank has backed off a bit, saying things like, "He gave me the tools to fish. That's the best way I can put it," and leaning a bit more into giving himself the credit. When it was noted that Tiger Tanaka shares the same name as a character who is the head of a Japanese Secret Service in the 1964 James Bond novel You Only Live Twice, Dukes claimed that the character is based off of the real person, and that Bond writer Ian Fleming was known to use real people as inspirations for his characters. And to be fair, there is some evidence to support the existence of a Senzo Tanaka operating as a Kempeitai agent in England during the 30s, and so the idea that Fleming could have based the character off of someone he really once met is not totally far-fetched. But, you know, for a kid to grow up a huge James Bond fan, so much so that it was the inspiration for you to get into martial arts, and then by happenstance meet and be mentored in martial arts by the real person that a famous Bond character of the time was based off of, it's really remarkable. Some might say it's completely unbelievable.
Long story short, we hear a story too good to be true. It ain't.
And that brings us back around to the $64,000 question. Did Senzo Tanaka really exist? And did he really train Frank Dukes as the latter claims? Well, one interesting thing is that remember Frank's first formal sensei, Sanzo Jack Seki? Evidently his father shared the same name of Sanzo Seki, and that as an alias, he would sometimes go by the name Senzo Tanaka. Moreover, he died in Japan in 1975. But wait, it gets weirder. In recent years, as the tools of technology have gotten better and Frank's story has reached more people, another man named Adam McKinley has begun to dig further into the origins of Senzo Tanaka. And with the help of his wife, who is a due diligence expert for the UN and privy to knowledge that would be harder for regular folks to get, he was able to in fact find a Senzo Tanaka who lived in the same area as Frank did in the 70s. This Tanaka also died in 1975, and Adam McKinley has confirmed that Frank did in fact have knowledge of some of the key characteristics surrounding information on this Senzo Tanaka, such as birthmarks and things of that nature. But to McKinley's counterpoint, he was unaware of information that had he actually known this person, he would have been privy to, so it's a bit of a wash in that aspect. What this does do is exonerate Frank from a famous 1988 LA Times editorial that states that they could not find any evidence of a Senzo Tanaka living in the area in the 60s and 70s. We may never know the whole truth surrounding Senzo Tanaka, but what we can definitively say is that a man with that name did in fact exist in Frank's neighborhood at that time. It is also worth noting that when asked about Senzo's passing, Frank's earlier answer stemmed around Tanaka going back to Japan and passing away there, but more recently has changed the story to be that he passed away in Los Angeles, which is a bit odd considering what we now know. It's likely that, just like a great number of Duke's tales, the truth is just a smaller version of the grand story surrounding it. But let's move on to a topic that I'm sure will be much more concise and have far less grand, unverifiable stories to it.
Excuse me, is this Sarcasm 101?
No, it's Lamaze class for men named Arthur.
Oh, okay.
1975 is also the year that Frank Dukes enlists in the Marines and begins his official military career. The majority of Frank's alleged military exploits come after the events of Bloodsport, so we will examine them further when the time is right. But as it pertains to the movie, the only real connection to his military career is the 2 men sent to retrieve him. According to Frank, though, this was never really any issue as the Marines never had any problem with his participating in the Kumite, and so this is apparently a work of fiction done for the movie. In fact, at one point, Frank went so far as to say that his participation in the tournament was part of a plan for him to infiltrate criminal rings that had associations with the event. So all of the scenes having to evade them, including the amazing Wile E. Coyote Roadrunner style chase, all done for dramatic effect. But at the very least, this aspect of the movie gave us one of Forrest Whitaker's first ever movie roles before he went on to become a star. And it also provided this amazing piece of work.
It doesn't matter what comes, fresh goes better in life. With Mentos fresh and full of life, nothing gets to you. Staying fresh, staying cool. With Mentos fresh and full of life, fresh goes better with Mentos freshness. Fresh goes better with Mentos fresh and full of life. Mentos.
This is also the time frame that I believe another piece of the answer to the Frank Dux mystery comes into play. In 1973, Bruce Lee's classic martial arts masterpiece, Enter the Dragon, is released to widespread acclaim and success. It is arguably his most well-known film, especially seeing as it was his last completed one before his shocking, untimely death later that year, and it is regarded as one of the greatest martial arts movies of all time. In it, Bruce's character is attempting to infiltrate and bring down a criminal organization through the means of entering a secret martial arts tournament held by the group on a secluded island hideout, which, you know, isn't exactly the plot of Bloodsport, right? Even given what was just mentioned about the military's apparent potential involvement in Frank's participation, I mean, our tournament takes place in the Kowloon-walled city inside of Hong Kong. Wait, no, scratch that. Frank has actually gone on record to say that this year's particular tournament really took place at a private residence in the Bahamas, which, if you are keeping track, is an island. So when you think about it with context, it actually does sound exactly like the plot of fucking Bloodsport. I need something to cheer me up.
Hey, babe, you wanna go out with a real big man? No, huh?
Ah, there we go. That's the stuff. Let's talk Ray Jackson. Ray's character in the movie is essentially that of the tough guy brawler who is testing his mettle evidently against the greatest martial artist in the world, and I have to say that I am truly intrigued by the chain of events as to how he got an invite to this thing.
What the hell are you talking about?
According to Frank, the character is based off of real-life biker martial artist Richard Robinson, and that the two met at the Kumite, where Dux claims that Robinson quickly found out he wasn't as tough as he thought he was. Robinson initially corroborated Frank's story, saying that he was invited to the Kumite as an undefeated high school wrestler, but it was later discovered that they in fact went to the same high school together. When Robinson was confronted with this information from the LA Times, he responded, "Alright, I don't know what to say. Frank was a buddy of mine when I was in LA." I like the movie version better.
I ain't your pal, dickface.
Anyway guys, let's move on to the tournament itself. We already covered that it didn't happen in Kowloon-walled city, even though I think that is the perfect setting for a secret underground fighting tournament to take place, even if it is maybe the worst kept secret in history.
I heard you can get killed at that Kumite.
You wanna see some real fighting, you can see me fight at the Kumite.
Why are you so interested in stopping the Kumite?
I'll fight in the Kumite and make my father proud.
You two are here for the Kumite, aren't you?
Guess the Kumite starts one day earlier this year.
We all know that the Kumite is happening here in Hong Kong. And we all know what's going on over the next 3 days.
The walled city was originally a Chinese military fort, but became essentially an ungoverned enclave inside of Hong Kong due to a weird agreement between China and Great Britain after World War II. Due to no police presence, this area was basically dominated by the Chinese triads during this time frame, and so as Frank's liaison Victor puts it, them allowing the Kumite to take place there makes a tremendous amount of sense.
Once you step out of the sunlight into the narrow corridors, it's time to protect your nuts, guys.
Frank and Ray are escorted through the dark and dingy city in a sequence that is just so well done, and they finally arrive at the arena. Frank has said that his original invitation to the Kumite came as a result of Senzo Tanaka's status as a former champion and his affiliation with him. In the movie, however, they give Frank a hard time about this, presumably because Frank takes after Grandma Tanaka.
You don't look like Tanaka.
And so to prove himself, he must show that he can execute the deadliest of moves, the death touch, the dim mak.
What the hell is a dim mak?
In the movie, Frank hits a stack of 5 bricks from the top and only breaks the bottom one, demonstrating the ability we pointed out earlier of striking someone and causing massive internal damage while not causing any external. Frank has demonstrated this in real life before, but you tell me if you spot the difference.
Ready?
You might have noticed the reduced number of bricks, and you also might have noticed that thin tile in between the 2 bricks. That thin tile is the key. It allows for the pressure to be applied to the center of that bottom brick, which is also being supported on its outer edges, and it allows for anyone to do that exact same trick. It's simple physics.
Very good. But brick, not hit back. Oh,
Don't hit back.
Oh, for fuck's sake. This is also where we meet the character of Janice, a reporter who is attempting to get a story on the Kumite. Frank saves her from getting pimp slapped by the Filipino fighter dressed as an Arab with a Russian accent.
She's coming with me upstairs.
She's going to take pictures of me naked and hit me with a belt. Her role in the movie is sort of our eyes as a spectator to this crazy event, but in real life Frank says he never hooked up with one before the Kumite, you know, that whole sapping your energy thing.
Stay away from women. All they want from you is your man juice.
But for a fun FYI, he did later marry a couple of journalists, so I suppose he has a type. But now it's time for the tournament to officially begin. And here is this guy again. Who is this guy? Oh well, you know, if it's important, it'll come to me. Next, Ray has the greatest Kumite debut ever, and I very much include Frank Dux in that.
Asshole.
Kill you, man. Yeah, you, man. You got it.
Then it's time to be formally introduced to the movie's villain.
It's Chong Li, the current champ.
He's never been defeated. He killed a guy during the last Kumite.
Yep, kicked the poor bastard right in the throat. I died right there on the platform. Chong Li stood there and watched him die.
Chong Li is played by Bolo Young, who legitimately terrified me as a kid, and according to Frank, he was a real person and was the defending champion. Also, when I was younger, I always assumed that the person Chong Li killed in the previous tournament that Ray and Victor are referring to was Shingo, and I think maybe even just a very subtle nod to that would have been excellent. Anyway, we'll come back to Chong Li, as now it's time for Frank to have his debut match, and as luck would have it, it's against Mr. Worldwide. Frank handles him like a prison bitch with Kool-Aid on his lips, and not only breaks out his front gold tooth, he breaks Chong Li's world record for the fastest KO in the process.
First fight in the Kumite, he broke the fucking world record! Yeah!
This is the first of many world records we're going to find out that Frank allegedly broke. In fact, let's talk about another one real quick because it directly relates to the format of the Kumite, and it has drawn some real questions over the years. Frank alleges to hold the record for the most consecutive knockouts in a tournament with 56, and this number has drawn some skepticism by those who can math pretty well, as they have pointed out that knocking out 56 consecutive people in a single elimination tournament would mean that the total field of competitors would have to be greater than the size of the entire population of the Earth, a concept called Kumite math. Frank explains this away by saying that the format of the Kumite is not single elimination, and that it is more of a round-robin type of affair, with the focus really being on making it to the end. Fighters would allegedly compete in up to 20 matches a day over a 3-day span to weed the field down to the best 8 competitors, who would be the finalists and then compete single elimination style to crown a winner. This would cover the Kumite math question, and on the one hand, when you watch the movie with this knowledge, you do sort of see the basis of that. On the other hand, after a while of listening to it, it comes off a bit, I don't know.
I beat down like 20 of them. Y'all should have seen me, it was on.
Honestly, even for what a convincing and captivating guy that Frank has the ability to be, after a while, everything starts to sort of sound that way.
I've got a million things I could do to this poor man.
I'm one of the baddest motherfuckers of all time.
And I became famous for this because what would happen was I would kick low, a guy would try to low block me, I'd break his wrist or his arm because it'd be traveling so fast, and my leg would continue up and hit him on the head and knock him out.
King Kong ain't got shit on me!
There's always that guy who wants to be the guy who says, yeah, I knocked out Frank Dux, because I've never been knocked out and never been beaten.
Which opponent poses the biggest threat to you in the tournament?
If I get drunk and fall down, hurt myself, I might lose.
In any event, the rest of the Day 1 matches play out as a montage over one of the greatest songs in movie history, Fight to Survive by Stan Bush. In fact, this whole soundtrack just slaps. But then after some stuff we've already covered, we're back for Day 2 of the tournament, where we start to see the top guys separate themselves from the pack. Quick shout out to this guy, who evidently was the realest martial artist of the entire group of fighters, and who many said would have won a real Kumite had one broke out on set. And oh boy, okay, let's crack this code before Chong Li cracks this guy's skull. Who are you? Wait. There we go, now I recognize him. That is Michel Kisi, who in real life was one of Jean-Claude Van Damme's closest friends and training partners. He would appear in a few Van Damme movies of the time, including his most famous role as the villain Tong Po in Kickboxer. So if you're an OG fan like me and you have ever wondered to yourself who would win in a fight between Chong Li and Tong Po, this is a fun little answer to that.
My leg! I'm sorry, sir, but I'm gonna break your leg.
As day 2 draws to an end, Frank is able to best the sumo wrestler character, which he always maintained in interviews was the toughest style of fighter for him to face, and so I think this is a nod to that. And then for the final match of the second day, Ray draws Chong Li. A worried Frank tries to give his friend tips, but Ray has a patented move, the primal run and scream. And it works for a bit, but Ray gets too ahead of himself and then gets his head smashed into itself. Chong Li taunts and enraged Frank, and then this sets the stage for an epic final with a revenge twist. Luckily, Ray isn't killed from his injuries and is only hospitalized, but Frank vows to get back at Chong Li in the final. This angers a confused Janice, and after a fight, she leaves to go snitch to the police in an effort to protect that good dick she got from the night before.
I have a friend fighting in it. I don't want him to get hurt.
Especially his cock and balls. You should have seen what happened to this poor sumo wrestler today.
The night before the grand finale of the Kumite, Frank is beset by the many things clouding the clear thinking he desperately needs to recenter, including this little thing that just gets funnier and funnier as I get older. Like, what if he had actually been on the train? Personally, I think it would have played into Frank's favor had he gotten to see big badass Chong Li reduced to the same circle of hell that is riding public transportation. Anyway, after some full splits rooftop meditation overlooking the entire city, which I don't know about you all, but always seems to do the trick of realigning me after an all is lost moment, it's officially time for the finals.
There aren't going to be any finals, Dukes. At least not for you.
You aren't real.
Now what? Are we gonna stop?
Frank is able to defeat one of the movie's other sub-bosses in the semifinals using the old you kick me first and then I kick you trick that would go on to become part of Van Damme's special moves for other movies, and I would bet dollars to donuts that Frank takes credit for teaching him. And, you know, it's cool, but a wildly ineffective strategy outside of maybe Dana White's looking for a bitch slap league.
Neck attack! Wanna go punch for punch? Oh, good one! I did not specify!
But then as a rebuttal, in his semi-final match, Chong Li takes it up just a notch in an effort to send a message to Frank.
Finish him!
He is shamed for this action by those in attendance, which seems kinda strange considering he apparently did this same thing in the last Kumite. I mean, fool me twice, right?
Are you not entertained? Are you not entertained?
And then he personally lets Frank know what's up.
You are next.
Which, as far as threatening lines go, after literally murdering a guy with your bare hands in front of the person you're threatening, is basically right up there with this.
And I'm just ferocious. I want your heart. I want to eat his children.
After what I'm sure was an awkward body disposal timeout period, it's time for the final match of the Kumite, the epic showdown between the defending champion and the upstart Western prodigy. And according to Frank, it's depicted in the movie pretty much exactly how it went in real life. He claims he was blinded in the middle of the fight and forced to finish it with his vision impaired. However, it was not from a crushed up salt pill that was intentionally given to Chong Li from his coach like we see in the film. Rather, this was a mixture of sweat and dit dao, which is a very popular topical painkiller in Eastern medicine, made from a combination of natural ingredients that are steeped in alcohol. This liniment unintentionally made its way into Frank's eyes during the fight, similar to the same way Muhammad Ali was temporarily blinded during his first fight with Sonny Liston. Luckily for Frank, he's built for this and he's been trained in the art of the blind tea party, so he is comfortable fighting without the use of his eyes. After a hard-fought scrap, Dukes overcomes all odds and is able to best Chong Li, even beating him to verbal submission by making him say Mate. Frank reclaims Ray's headband and takes it back to him in the hospital as a token of friendship, but according to him, the real Chong Li wasn't the one who eliminated the man who the Jackson character was modeled after, and that he actually had been eliminated much earlier as a result of a rear naked choke. However, as far as the real Chong Li, Frank has made no mention that I could find of their paths crossing ever again after this, and he has claimed that he has heard differing accounts of what happened to him after his loss in the tournament. One story is he passed away in a car accident before the filming of the movie, and another is that he might have passed away due to brain tumors brought on by his fighting career, similar to the same style that almost killed Frank himself, but we're getting to that. It's worth noting too that there is literally no evidence of the murderous martial arts master Chong Li having ever really existed, and no one from the fighting world or otherwise claims to have ever encountered him, so read into that whatever you will. After his victory in the final, Frank is presented with the honorary katana sword that is given to the winner, which he dedicates to Senzo, fulfilling his goal and bringing us full circle. The story of what really happened to this sword is apparently very interesting as well. Frank says that the customary thing is typically for the winner to sell the sword back to the Black Dragons, at which point the money is then procured and then donated to a charity of the winner's choosing. With the money he was awarded for this, Frank says he chose to take it to the Philippines and use it to purchase a large number of contracts of young children who were essentially in a situation of indentured servitude to a band of pirates. Frank claimed at the time that Bloodsport was released to still be in contact with many of them, and that at least one of them would happily shed blood for him.
This shit just got rigged.
What you gonna do, bitch?
I'm gonna tell you what. I'm gonna do. You know Luca Perry from 20th and 25th?
You ever heard of Rolling 20s, nigga?
Anyway, now that he is the Grand Kumite champion, Frank keeps his promise to return home and finish his military service. He bids farewell to Janice before our credits roll and give us some parting information about Frank's fighting accolades, including his status as an undefeated world champion, amassing an unheard of record of 329 wins with no defeats over a period of the subsequent 5 years between 1975 and 1980 when he retired. When it comes to the question of proof of the legitimacy of these claims, Frank has attempted to point to a few pieces of evidence to corroborate his story. Pieces of footage have surfaced here and there over the years with various attempts to claim that they are or are not Frank from his fighting days. One famous one is that of who is thought to be French fighter Philippe Cardot, finishing guys with spinning kicks that sent them to the floor in pain. At times, Frank has tried to claim this footage to be his, but has also backed off a bit in recent years, saying things like, "There's no way to be certain all the way, I've fought so many matches, it's a blur." I wonder how much Philippe Cardot's son threatening to sue Frank has to do with that. Dukes also claims to have Kumite footage that he has shown his most loyal students that reach the highest level of training. Frank has gone on to say that these events are recorded at all angles by as many as 16 high-speed film cameras, but when pressed about this in the legal arena with the perfect opportunity to prove all of his naysayers wrong, he was unable to do this because, mysteriously, all of this footage had been stolen by enemies of his, and there is somehow no other footage out there to support these claims.
Makes sense, sounds real.
The trophy that Frank claims to have won from his Kumite victory and that appeared with him in the Black Belt article about the tournament has drawn a lot of controversy as well. Remember that LA Times editorial from 1988 that I mentioned in part 1, which claimed to have found no proof of a Senzo Tanaka in Frank's area during the 70s? Well, the guy who wrote it, John Johnson, great name, also claimed to have the scoop on the actual way Frank procured his championship trophy as well. He wrote that the W.R. Moody Company, a trophy shop in North Hollywood, were shown photos of the trophy, and they said that the base and the ceramic plaque were made by their company. However, there are some issues with the receipt Johnson claimed was his smoking gun. One thing people like to get hung up on is the misspelling of Frank's last name on the receipt, reading D-U-K-E-S rather than D-U-X. Honestly though, a misspelled name really isn't that giant of a revelation. You ever been to Starbucks? The far more interesting thing is that the notes describing the trophy style on the receipt and the design draw-up of it don't appear to match the Kumite trophy at all. Frank's explanation of this receipt's existence is that it was for a different trophy that he commissioned them to repair for him after it had been damaged. If you ask me, which you did because, you clicked on this video, there is certainly a plausible story to this, and I have to side with Frank on this that the receipt proves nothing. In regard to the real trophy itself, Frank told Black Belt Magazine that the trophy is never really the property of the winner, and its value makes it worth keeping it in a secure place.
Hey, wait, do you have the trophy in your office right here?
Yeah, I do actually.
Can we see this trophy?
See it, right?
Oh, that's cool, man.
Another of Frank's claims related to the Kumite is that martial arts actor Paco Prieto, best known for his role as the swimming pool fighter in Lionheart, can back up all of his Kumite tales based on the fact that he was apparently Mexico's champion and that the two nearly almost had a fight in the tournament. Paco has given interviews in recent years stating that he has never participated in a Kumite and that Frank's stories of him being the champion of Mexico essentially equated to him beating up some drunks in a bar and winning some street fights. Not a good look for Frank.
You lied. You never win.
There is also the matter of Kenneth Wilson, a member of the Ministry of Sports in the Bahamas, saying that it would have been impossible for a martial arts tournament of that scale to be kept secret at that time, and that they would have known. But it would make sense to say that, wouldn't it? You might also be asking, if this thing is so secret, why is Frank out here telling the whole world about it? Well, he maintains that he was given the green light to go ahead and act as a spokesperson for Kumite co-sponsor, the IFAA, in an effort to draw more American fighters to the event, and as he puts it, to let people know the event is around, and it exists, so when the IFAA does ask them to think about trying out for it, they will be serious, because it is very real. So as you can see, the truth surrounding the levels of legitimacy of his Kumite tales as we know them from the movie are about as murky as it gets. And to be absolutely fair to Frank, he may have won a tournament amassed by an organization of his friends and colleagues, but it's sort of the same thing as me gathering up 8 of my friends, forming pretty excellent national, international street fighting, and then having a secret tournament in my backyard and declaring the winner the world heavyweight champion. Sure, it's technically true, but is it all of the truth?
Okay, Frank, you win. But it's wrong what you're doing. It's a mistake.
And for a tournament claiming to be determining who is the best fighter in the world, the obvious next question is, why didn't they approach legit known fighters like Muhammad Ali, Judo Jean LaBelle, or Rorion Gracie? At the very least, Count Dante actually challenged Ali to a legit fight. Whatever the case, this next 12-year period of time in Frank's life from 1975 to 1987 is where we go from mostly harmless claims of being a martial arts wunderkind trained by a real-life ninja and may or may not have won a secret underground competition to things with more legal and moral implications, as this is when Frank's alleged military career comes into play, as well as the events around the creation and production of Bloodsport. This is also where we dip into another sub-layer of the Dukes debate, because with a lot of this going forward, we not only have to question the legitimacy of his claims, but also whether Frank actually made the claim at all. He has gone on to deny making many statements that have been attributed to him over the years, or argued that he was misrepresented in the retelling of them when he is seemingly nailed dead to rights after being challenged. Just a fair warning, it's about to get thick, and we might be Quentin Tarantinoing a bit when it comes to the timeline.
I think the best way to tell the story is by starting at the end, briefly, then going back to the beginning, and then periodically returning to the end, maybe giving different characters perspectives throughout, just to give it a bit of dynamism. Otherwise, it's just sort of a linear story.
Just tell us what happened.
In the interest of making this as easy as possible to follow, we will highlight things we know to be factually true in white, such as we know from Frank's official military paperwork that his service began on April 14th of 1975. Frank's claims will appear in red, such as him winning the Kumite in November of that same year. And if a claim is something that Frank has denied making or claims is misrepresented, we will highlight that in green. Speaking of that, let's knock off some low-hanging fruit right away. One of the first holes that people often punch in Frank's stories is that he claims to be a veteran of the Vietnam War. This would obviously be ridiculous right on the face of it, because the United States withdrew the last of its troops in Vietnam in early 1973 when Frank was still 16. and I think it's safe to say the only 16-year-olds who fought in the Vietnam War were Vietnamese. Frank maintains that he has never claimed to be a veteran of the Vietnam War, and that while the US did end official military operations there in 1973, that it did not cease clandestine operations in Southeast Asia, including Vietnam. It is these types of missions that Frank says he took part in, and that the Vietnam War veteran thing is just a misunderstanding. This misinterpretation likely stems from a couple of places. One of them being the very first article that Frank wrote for Black Belt magazine on knife fighting techniques in October of 1980, where it clearly states, Frank Dukes is a former consultant to the armed forces who has trained military units in blade use and who has used and been decorated for his blade fighting techniques in actual combat in Southeast Asia. I think that it sort of goes without saying, but claiming in 1980 that you saw combat in Southeast Asia would certainly imply the Vietnam War to most every American who read it. But okay, fair enough, he did not specifically say that. Fast forward to May of 1987, an article for Inside Kung Fu Presents The Complete Guide to the Ninja, entitled Frank Dukes, the man behind the legend, refers to him directly as a distinguished Vietnam vet, security expert, Kumite champion, and Koga Yamabushi ninjutsu master. They also go on to say, after training with Tanaka for several years, Dukes was called on to serve in Vietnam and came out of the experience with a chest full of medals and a basic distrust of institutions like the military. Frank may dispute that he ever claimed that he was a Vietnam veteran, or that these articles were just him being taken out of context, but looking at the official flyers for his schools during the 80s, it outwardly states that he is one of the most decorated veterans of the Southeast Asian conflict. Honestly, I want to give him the benefit of the doubt that he wouldn't really try to pass off such a seemingly obvious bullshit claim, but when you look at the evidence of it and the sheer number of others who did try this around the same time period, I just can't. What Dukes does still maintain is that he performed clandestine missions in Southeast Asia, and made mention of having contact with retired Army Major General John Singlow, who allegedly headed the Phoenix program. This was a special program designed to identify Viet Cong operatives and to destroy their infrastructure using some of the more extreme methods. The problem with Dukes' claims are, firstly, the Phoenix program officially ceased existence in 1972, and while there are rumors of activities extending past that, there would have been no operatives left after the fall of Saigon in 1975, this same year Frank enlisted. The man he mentioned as running the program, John Singlub, was heading the Studies and Observations group at the time, which was an entirely different program having nothing to do with the Phoenix. And despite Frank saying that the last time he saw Singlub was at a Spec Ops Expo in San Diego in 1993, Singlub did not attend this event and has gone on record to say that he does not know Frank Dukes. When I kept digging a little further, I found the story behind another of Frank's supposed Southeast Asian exploits, a mission known as Operation Sanction. In the early 80s, a well-known writer named Eric Blankeny penned an article highlighting Frank for Crown magazine titled Frank Dukes, Fighting Back Again. In it, we're told of Lance Corporal Dukes' participation in a special operations group which crossed the border into Laos on a covert mission. Frank was one of the few who survived this, being forced to watch his friends die as he fought his way back into Thailand with bayonet wounds to the stomach and shrapnel in his back. After recuperating in a jungle hospital, he was shipped back home to the US, where the Marines decorated their returning hero. When information on this mission leaked, Dukes was one of the select few who was chosen to testify, and according to him, due in part to the increased public pressure on the Vietnam conflict, the military denied not only the mission's existence, but also Frank's existence as a soldier at all. Apparently at this congressional hearing, a military doctor testified to having treated Frank for bayonet wounds 3 miles from the Laotian border, and that Operation Sanction really does exist. But as what will become a pattern with Frank, much of this was kept secret.
No, it's a secret.
Frank has gone on to deny any knowledge of or claims of participation in Operation Sanction, and that this is fabricated evidence stemming from a promotional flyer coming from a Shidoshi Dukes martial arts studios that he has never had any affiliation with. and he also later claimed that the Crown article was written by a junior college student who sensationalized it looking to get a good grade. It's worth noting that Frank attended Los Angeles Valley College, where Crown magazine is published out of, and according to school transcripts was a full-time student beginning in September of 1975. Another article with an interview from Dukes from 1981, this time for Kick Illustrated, titled "Can Ninjutsu Make You the Ultimate Warrior?" makes mention of Frank's covert exploits, calling him one of the most decorated Marines to ever come out of Southeast Asia. This article also credits him for training his fellow Marines in Taekwondo and Hwarangdo in 1975, and also a mission to South Korea in 1977 in the same capacity, training the Royal Korean Marine Corps, which of course makes sense because seeing as Taekwondo originates in Korea, if there's one thing that South Korean soldiers definitely need, it's a 21-year-old American teaching it to them. He also cites being an anti-terrorist consultant to the Somoza regime in Nicaragua in 1978, but left after only a couple of days. Keep in mind that Frank was also allegedly the undefeated reigning heavyweight Kumite world champion during this period, becoming the first fighter to exceed 300 fights in 1978, and fighting a total of 329 matches from the fall of 1975 until 1980, when he officially retires from competition undefeated after one last open challenge. It is around this time of his official retirement that in March of 1980, Frank opens his first school in North Hollywood, Dukes Ninjutsu. He claims that he had previously been teaching in parks and private clubs prior to acquiring his dojo, and that he was already at a disadvantage promoting ninjutsu, seeing as most people didn't really understand what that was at the time. To be honest, it also wasn't taken very seriously as a martial art. Ninjutsu! What made matters even harder was that martial arts were experiencing a boom period in terms of interest, and even though there were lots of people looking to learn, there was fierce competition amongst teachers at the time attracting these students. Publicity was good if you could get it, but what was even better was if you had a hook, something to offer that other sensei could not. Accomplishments or techniques that made you stand out from all of the others. Perhaps, let's say you can claim you're an underground full contact fighting champion, or possibly that you did time in Southeast Asia and have tested your skills in real-life combat. Anyway, it is 6 months later in September of 1980 that Frank's first black belt article is published, Unlocking Power, Keys to Success. The following month in October, another of his articles makes the magazine, this time on self-defense against knives. And then the crown jewel of the Duke's black belt trifecta is published in the November issue, Kumite, A Learning Experience. Frank claims black belt was after him for about 6 months to do the Kumite article, and that he initially did not want to do it, but that he finally acquiesced due to the Black Dragons insisting that he go ahead and do the article, to monetize it and get some publicity for the tournaments that they didn't want a lot of public attention on and that a tremendous amount of illegal gambling happened at. At any rate, like we mentioned in part 1, it was Black Belt's editor at the time, Jon Stewart, that authored and gave the final go-ahead for Kumite, A Learning Experience, and in all reality, it's him that Frank should be dedicating a samurai sword to, because Jon Stewart essentially made Dukes with the publishing of this. He also provided a glowing letter of endorsement that would prove to be incredibly valuable to Frank. To whom it may concern, with the popularity of the secret art of ninjutsu on the rise, there are dozens of martial artists appearing to present themselves as experts on the ways of the ninja. However, the fact is that there are only 2 genuine non-oriental ninja known to the world today, and one of them lives in Japan. The other is Frank Dukes. Dukes is a professional consultant in the field of martial arts, a full-contact Kumite champion, and the instructor of some impressive students. He is also expert at setting up and performing stunts of all kinds, both real and illusory. There are other martial artists who will insist they are familiar with ninjutsu, but if it is important to have access to the real thing, Frank Dukes is your man. Remember when I said you need something to stand out from the pack in this world? Evidently, the editor of the most popular martial arts magazine calling you the only genuine non-oriental ninja living in the United States is a good enough hook for not only attracting students to dojos, it also attracts movie producers looking to bring a legit ninja into the burgeoning martial arts genre. It's not exactly hard to see how this could have happened. Ninja fandom was at an all-time high, and Black Belt certainly knew that was their current bread and butter. In fact, Stewart had run 4 other articles in 1980 on ninjutsu before the one on Frank. The Ninja Mind, The Modern Ninja, Ninja Training Secrets, and Ninjutsu, The Mysterious Past. All of these were a collaboration between Stewart and Stephen K. Hayes, another practitioner of ninjutsu, but a seemingly more credible one. Hayes is likely that other ninja authority that is being referenced in the letter and has long been considered an enemy of Frank's, as he is frequently cited as one of the main people nefariously attempting to orchestrate Frank's downfall. It really sort of sets off alarm bells that Stewart clearly should have been enough in the know from his correspondence with Hayes that he should have seen through this, and he does kind of cover his tracks in the foreword to the article. From time to time, Black Belt learns of unusual events or occurrences in the martial arts. Events that, either because of their nature or because they occurred in the distant past, cannot be easily verified. Because we do not want our readers to be misinformed, Black Belt has a policy of strict verification of all facts pertaining to any article. In this case, several members of the staff have invested considerable amounts of time and energy checking the details of the following article. Although there is no convenient way to verify each and every detail connected with this story, the editors have verified enough of the basic facts to feel confident in publishing it. But since we are not at liberty to share the corroborating evidence with the public, we acknowledge that each reader may have a different idea of what the facts permit them to believe. Stewart has gone on record to say that shortly after the article appeared, he received information that made him question Dukes' military career. Sometimes we get caught, and we were naive enough to think that this added up. Maybe it was naivete, but looking at the timeline of events during this period brings another plausible explanation to light. Frank says that after seeing they were going to go ahead and publish this article, that he realized that this would likely make for a good movie script, and so as a means to protect himself in a legal sense, on November 7th, 1980, he registers what he refers to as the first concrete treatment of Bloodsport with the Writers Guild of America, under the name Return of the Ninja. Side note, Dukes also says that it was when Canon Films released the Enter the Ninja series in 1981 that he realized he would have to change the name if he ever wanted to pitch it to them, which is when Frank says he officially started using the term and the title, Bloodsport. The quick turnaround time in relation to the article and knowing what we know about Black Belt's willingness to publish ninja-related content certainly raises my suspicions, as this seems awful coordinated to me. Maybe it's all just coincidence and conspiracy, but I think some promises were made to Jon Stewart in return for his official endorsement. Whether it was intentional or not by Black Belt, Frank Dukes would never appear in another issue in any official capacity for them, which he attributes to anti-Semitism after the magazine discovered he was Jewish. Frank and his lawyer continue to stand on the fact that Black Belt never officially retracted the article in a separate issue of the magazine, and so they must still stand by this. Jon Stewart left Black Belt sometime in the early to mid-80s, but his successor Jim Coleman has gone on to say, "The movie is built on false premises. From what we can ascertain, there has never been a competition like this." In response to the absence of a retraction, Coleman has stated that he was not there during the time this was published, proving the claims without any doubt to be false could be considered almost as difficult as proving them to be true. The thing is, that's not how the burden of proof works in an argument. It is always on the person making the assertion. Basically, it's like me saying that I beat Frank Dukes in a secret match with one arm tied behind my back. Frank says I can't prove this ever happened, and I respond with, well, you can't prove that it didn't. So that basically makes me the World Kumite Champion, and with that, I would like to announce my official retirement as the undefeated, undisputed champion. No, all bullshit aside, none of this stuff mattered to Frank, as he now had all the credibility needed to begin a foothold in Hollywood, and his agent began circulating this letter everywhere they could. He began making contacts in the industry, and soon he would link up with an, at the time, small-time aspiring screenwriter named Sheldon Lettich. The two would hit it off quickly and become fast friends, and in approximately late 1982, they became official writing partners. Their first official project together, a screenplay titled The Naked Kill, was registered with the WGA in March of 1983, and another, entitled Alpha Deuce, was registered December 17, 1984. Frank also appeared in Sheldon's short film Firefight, which was filmed in 1983 and was just recently finally released to the public last month on Viking Samurai's channel. It's a really good short film and is the first on-camera appearance for not only Frank, but also Brian Thompson before he went on to have a pretty successful movie career, and Philip and Simon Ree before they were introduced to the world in the Best of the Best franchise. You should definitely give it a look if you have the chance. Anyway, Frank maintains that he did not want to be in Firefight and that Sheldon had to convince him to do so as he did not want to be an actor. This runs in opposition to what Sheldon Lettich says, alleging that Frank saw himself as a potential leading man in Hollywood with movie star looks akin to Tom Selleck. For what it's worth, Frank did have a role in another movie titled Get the Terrorists in 1987.
You know you'll get what's coming to you. Look, midget brain, we're in this for the money. We're not in this to take orders from you. I'm tired of your double talk.
But strangely enough, in a rare bout of agreement between the two, both he and Sheldon Lettich attest that there was never any conversations about Frank playing himself in Bloodsport. I don't know, to me it would seem as though someone who was that thirsty to be an actor would have made playing himself one of the conditions of making a movie of his life story. And speaking of that story, Sheldon Lettich's tellings of the origins of making a movie about Frank's Kumite exploits was from hearing the stories that he regaled at the time and thinking that it would make a great plot for a feature-length film. He claims the two never did sit down and write the script for it at the time for some reason, but that the idea would resurface when Sheldon was in the process of editing Firefight and becomes acquainted with producer Mark DeSalle. DeSalle had been producing pornos at the time, but had an idea for a martial arts movie that would eventually go on to become the plot of Kickboxer, and he wanted to pitch having this written by Lettich. Sheldon claims he was not impressed with the concept for Kickboxer, as apparently early pitch ideas had things such as Tong Po killing Kurt's mother with a kick to the face in their home. Sheldon says that it was at this time he pitches Frank's story to DeSalle, and that he immediately becomes more interested in that. So a meeting is arranged between the three to start discussions. Frank's version of what happened next is that Sheldon brought Mark DeSalle to meet him at his dojo with the intention to talk logistics for possibly making Kickboxer, and that instead, DeSalle noticed the framed black belt article on the wall and he inquired about it. Frank says he told him the story and that he had adapted it into a screenplay back in 1981, and that was when DeSalle lost all interest in Kickboxer for the time and wanted to make this instead. Frank says at this point Sheldon began to get upset as he apparently feared that he was being cut out of his importance and financial stake in the project, and so he threatens to withhold access to DeSalle's financing and to essentially kill the deal unless he is given the writing credit. Frank alleges this all to have taken place in front of the man who was lawyer to both of them at the time, Michael Frankel, and he has supplied what he claims to be letters sent to both him and Lettich from Michael Frankel proving his side of things. These are dated March 3rd, 2020, and I'm certainly not the grammar police, but yeah, you'll just see as we go through. Dear Sheldon, you seem to forget about Alpha Deuce and Bloodsport and you in 84 to 85 bargaining with Frank for a written by credit on the screenplay you were hired for by DeSalle, and Frank had the limited life rights contract with DeSalle by saying to me and Frank as you were editing Firebase Short, this is my price for bring in DeSalle's money. You had story discussions about Bloodsport in front of me way before you filmed Firebase Short. I have always said you are entitled to that credit on the screenplay, but not on the underlying life rights. You were only allowed on a work for hire to write on the material that DeSalle licensed from Frank. Frank retained all novelization rights to the Bloodsport story. Further, DeSalle's attorney and Cannons requested and got tapes of Frank's fight documentation on his life, etc. Another letter dated September 18th, 2019. Sheldon, you did not write Bloodsport from conversation with Frank. He had a full story that was to show other people in the industry before you and he found DeSalle. Also, you only according your contract had the license to write about true incidents in Frank's life that he would have had to share with you. I too sick to deal with both of your bullshit. You had an absolute right to write the script and get written by credit. I was there when you two agreed upon that rather the original agreement to co-write the script with Frank, as you did with Alpha Deuce, as you compensation for bring in money. Sheldon, stop attacking me for not agreeing with you. You seem to forget that you and Frank had me looking for money on your joint projects as a producer and then took the projects back. Frank says that against his lawyer's advice, he willingly gave up the writing credits to Sheldon and agreed to make his money when it came to points on the movie's final haul. What seems to be the reasoning for this resurgent push for the insistence of a writing credit by Frank is that in the age of streaming, writers continue to get small residuals every time a movie is watched, and these add up as the access to streaming has exploded. Sheldon Lettich maintains that in a legal sense concerning script writing, Frank provided only the source material of his true life story, and the problem is that when it comes to writing credits for what becomes the script, that's not how they work. Lettich says ironically, had Frank said from the very beginning that this whole thing is made up, there would be no question as to him getting writing credits for creating these characters and general plot. Frank still argues that the existence of the treatment for Return of the Ninja in 1980 completely destroys that narrative and that he has always been the real writer of Bloodsport. Sheldon Lettich's response to that is amazingly dismissive. Now, does that sound like it's about a tournament? Return of the Ninja? Oh, that's about a martial arts tournament. No, it's not. And the script does not exist, okay? And if it exists, show it to us. Frank won't show this to anyone. He just makes stuff up.
I'm tired of your double talk.
What we do know as absolute fact is that Frank sold the rights to his true life story to Mark DeSalle on June 15, 1985, and DeSalle officially hired Sheldon Lettich as per the terms of the contract to render such services as we require to write and revise an original screenplay based upon the life story of Frank Dux, the rights to which we own and which we assign to you for this writing assignment entitled Bloodsport, consisting of a first draft screenplay and one set of revisions thereto, and a final draft screenplay or polish based thereon, suitable for production of a feature-length theatrical motion picture intended initially for theatrical exhibition in the United States. Which in a legal sense is about as rock solid as Ray Jackson's head.
Neither is this. For you.
One thing life has taught me is that 100% of human brains will recollect controversial moments in their lives painted with themselves in the best light. I also know that when money and legal matters get involved, it gets incredibly personal and it brings out the worst in everyone. So let's be clear, I don't expect the complete truth from anyone involved. But in my opinion, regardless of whether this story is true or not, Frank Dux does deserve a writing credit for it, and I think it was just bad business decisions in a cutthroat industry that cost him. Whatever the truth is behind how the script came into existence, the finished product would be acquired by a relatively obscure independent production company called Cannon Films in March of 1986.
We're Cannon Films, and we're dynamite.
Cannon was one of the amazing smaller scale outfits of the 70s and 80s that unfortunately did not survive into our time, as they were absorbed by some of the juggernauts of the industry when they began buying up and consolidating smaller companies. But at the time, they were known as a studio willing to take big risks on ultra-genre specific films, unknown stars, and projects that were generally seen as not worth the bigger company's risk. This ballsy approach led to producing some real hidden treasures of 70s and 80s cinema, and it led to an, at the time, relatively unknown Belgian martial artist getting his first real big break when he was boldly cast in Bloodsport's lead role, Jean-Claude Van Damme. Van Damme had appeared as an uncredited extra in the 1984 Cannon film Breakin', seen here giving us an example of the sweet dance moves that he would later show in Kickboxer. He also had just recently completed his first featured on-screen appearance as the villain in the film No Retreat, No Surrender, where he would show an example of the sweet martial arts moves that would later make him a star. Accounts on how he landed this role seem to differ, but I suppose in a way they could all be true. It should surprise absolutely no one at this point to hear that Frank's telling is that it was his personal lobbying for Jean-Claude that led him to be cast in the role rather than the studio's apparent original choice, Michael Dudikoff. Frank believed that the two bared a solid resemblance from when he was in his early 20s, and yeah, I can see that. Sheldon Lettich has recently relayed a pretty famous story that had been corroborated by Van Damme himself as well as Michelle Kesey, that while riding down La Cienega Boulevard in LA, Van Damme happened to see the owner of Cannon Films, Menahem Golan, coming out of a restaurant. The two had previously met at Cannes Film Festival when Jean-Claude was hustling his name around trying to get signed, and seeing an opportunity to make another impression on Golan, he quickly pulled over and approached him. Van Damme is notorious for his ability to throw a kick at a person's face with such precision that he can come within a couple of inches without ever touching them, and when Golan got close, he got his attention by saying, "Hey Menahem, remember me? Jean-Claude Van Damme!" and threw his trademark fake-out kick. Golan happened to be looking for a person to play Frank Dux, and this impressed him enough to get a business card and an appointment with him to talk future ideas. Over the years, Van Damme has told a couple of versions of how he got this role, but hands down my favorite one is the story he told Collider Podcast, which I'm going to choose to believe is the events of his follow-up meeting. And when you have the time, you should really give it a listen because it is great.
He said, "You want a glass of milk?" I said, "Yeah." "You want some cookies?" I said, "Yeah." "Put?" He think, and they go, "Karen, bring me Bloodsport."
Sheldon Lettich says that Van Damme first came onto his and Dukes' radar when they were recommended by Mark DeSalle to go see No Retreat, No Surrender and give their opinion of whether quote-unquote Jean-Claude Van Damme would be a good fit. After seeing it, they both agreed that this was their guy, and perhaps this is where Frank believes he helped to secure him the role. But with their financing in place, their main star cast, and an incredibly experienced assistant director, New Arnold, tabbed to take his first shot in the driver's seat as director, filming of Bloodsport would commence on location in Hong Kong in the summer of 1986. Frank has said over the years that he personally was the one to painstakingly train Van Damme to be able to play him convincingly, and the fight choreography, which is an amalgamation of Frank and Michel Kisi, really is fantastic and ahead of its time. With only a small budget, this movie had to make the best use of everything it had, and it did an incredibly commendable job at that. Even though it completed filming in '86, Bloodsport would actually sit on the shelf for quite some time, and there was even some question about whether it would get a theatrical release at all, or just go straight to VHS, which in those days only happened to the bottom of the barrel. Part of this was simply because Canon had overextended themselves a bit with their risk-taking, and were having some financial problems on the distribution side of things. A bigger reason, however, was because the first cut of the movie looked very, very different to the finished product, and Menachem Golan was so disgusted that he was prepared to nuke it straight to video store shelves, and despite signing a 3-year picture with Van Damme, he referred to him as poison and wanted no more to do with him. Bloodsport was in a proverbial bloody heap with its eyes blinded by salt, but it was not completely defeated, and it was about to have its comeback moment. Cannon Films had an ace in the hole by the name of Michael J. Duffy, whom they had previously used as sort of a fixer on badly edited movies, and after working his magic with the footage, that is exactly what he did, and he truly saved the movie by delivering the much better version that we know as the final one. This began to get positive buzz amongst the few who were able to see it, and despite Golan's trepidation, they decided to give it a West Coast test release to give it a shot. It ended up overperforming, and this would lead to its official widespread nationwide release on February 26, 1988, and it was certainly worth the wait for all involved, as it netted a very impressive $50 million all in total against a budget of about $1.5 to $2 million. It would spawn 3 direct-to-video sequels that neither Dukes, Van Damme, nor Lettich have anything to do with, and they progressively get worse as they go. The new main character, played by Daniel Bernhardt, is named Alex Cardot, and is basically trying to be Frank Dukes so hard that they might as well have called him Drank Fuchs.
Bloodsport 8, no Fuchs given. Look for it straight free on your Crackle app or whatever.
You like watching people get fucked for free?
But at least for the second one, they got back Donald Gibb to play Ray Jackson, and as you can see, even Chong Li stomping his brain in hasn't changed him one bit, as we get some vintage Ray.
Oh my, will you get a look at that?
Who's she?
Kim Campbell, that's the first woman they ever invited to the Kumite. Isn't she something?
She'll eat you alive.
Breakfast, lunch, and dinner. Oh, yeah.
Come up here, get the best of both worlds. I'll beat you like a woman and beat you like a man.
Anyway, after Bloodsport premiered, Frank enjoyed a nice boom to his public profile. His collaborations with Sheldon Lettich and Jean-Claude continued, as he would also serve as fight choreographer for another fan favorite, the 1990 film Lionheart. And he began a writing partnership with Van Damme as well, working and co-authoring a screenplay with the super originally titled Enter the New Dragon. By all accounts, his schools were also doing very well, with him having all sorts of offers from investors to expand, and it appeared that all signs were coming up Dukes. At least for a bit. However, shortly after the movie came out was when we got the first major signs of Frank's detractors stepping forward, with the previously mentioned LA Times article calling everything into question. This began a vicious cycle over the coming years of Frank grasping to verify his claims, only for more and more of his stories to be challenged. One such instance occurred in April 1993 at the International Martial Arts Festival in Bercy, a neighborhood of Paris, France, where Frank would display new feats of badassery not yet seen to the world. He performed his patented question mark kick through 2 champagne bottles, he dim-mocked a Jack Daniels whiskey bottle into pieces, and then the coup de grace, Frank becomes the first person ever to punch through bulletproof glass.
That's pretty goddamn impressive.
So let's start with the 3 bottles. Now, it's not for me to definitively say, but many have made the accusation over the years that rather than being real bottles, that these were made out of candied glass. I'm no expert on the matter, but just from my own perception, when these bottles are broken, they don't really appear to shatter in the way that real glass does, and they instead seem to powderize, leaving trails, which is very consistent with candied glass since it's just finely ground confectioner's sugar. The bulletproof glass is a bit more nuanced when we dig into it though. There are 2 types of bulletproof glass. The ones that you would see in a bank are made from actual glass that is laminated with plastic layers in between the glass ones. The other, much cheaper kind isn't actually glass. It's made of a shatter-resistant polycarbonate named Lexan, and when used with at least 3/4 of an inch thickness, it can be used as an alternative to the layered glass. You would see this inside of like a gas station or a hospital. This is the type that Frank claims to have broken, even though he did misspell it, and again, there is no definitive proof that this is not indeed Lexan, but there are many caveats. Some have disputed the thickness of the panel from the photos, and others have also pointed out that the impact site proving the integrity of the Lexan appears to be inconsistent with a 9mm bullet impact as Dukes claims, and rather it is likely from a pellet round. There is also the fact that Lexan degrades when exposed to ultraviolet light and can shatter if not replaced once a year per the manufacturer's suggestion. But maybe these claims are legit, and this is just the deceptive work of another well-known Frank Dukes hater. Science.
She blinded me with science!
Another gathering later that same year didn't go quite as well though for Frank. He attended the 2nd annual Draka Martial Arts Trade Show in Los Angeles, where he would have an infamous altercation with a fighter named Zane Frazier. The source of the conflict and how it went down differ depending on who is telling the tale, but what is for sure known is that Frank had hired Zane to teach some classes for his dojo, and Frazier claims he was never paid for this. At the time, Zane had just recently won the World Kickboxing Federation's Super Heavyweight Championship and was being scouted by Art Davie and Rorion Gracie to fight in the very first UFC event. This event was where they intended to approach him about his participation, and Davie has told the story that when they arrived, there were police already on the scene, as Frazier had apparently kicked the shit out of Frank Dukes when they encountered one another.
So he tried to throw a punch at me and try to put me over his table, but I moved and he fell on his table. So I moved around. Now I'm at Jeff Speakman's table. So he comes at me and I hit him again. Bing, 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 bing. He tries to throw another punch. He tries to grab me and choke me. So I parry his arms. I hit him with a vertical elbow, horizontal elbow, knee to the body, and elbow. I hit him again. So now he's sitting back and days, and all of a sudden he's mad. He's bleeding out of his nose. And then he comes at me, bum rushes me again. I step back and hit him with about 7, 8 punches backing up. And then he finally gets him by my throat, by break his grip, and I pick him up. And I went Uchimata. And I picked him up, his feet were above his head, and I body slammed him on top of Jeff Speakman's table with it broke in half. Now I'm beating the snot out of him. He's trying to poke my eyes out.
Duke says that it was him the UFC founders had been after for about a year to fight in an exhibition at the first event, and that Frazier had been hounding him ever since about being the opponent, so much so that apparently Dukes filed a restraining order against him. Frank claims that Zane approached him with an entourage looking to goad him into taking a swing as a publicity stunt, and when Frank challenged him to settle it in the ring that they had there, this caused Zane to backtrack a bit, and everyone evidently had a good laugh at his expense. He then left and returned about 20 minutes later, and Frank alleges that when he was knelt over signing an autograph for a kid, Frazier sucker punched him in the back of the head with brass knuckles. Legendary MMA referee Big John McCarthy was in attendance that day and witnessed this altercation and has said Frank's version is complete fabrication to save face for himself, and that he genuinely got his ass kicked by Frazier after a verbal confrontation.
I'm tired of your double talk.
Frank would later attempt to sue Zane Frazier, but lost in court. Zane Frazier did go on to fight in UFC 1, and he was defeated in the first round after kickboxer Kevin Rozier knocked him down with strikes to the back of the head, and then finished the fight with foot stomps that would make Chong Li wince. Despite being on the losing end of an altercation with a man who ended his MMA career with a 4-11 record, when Frank was asked if you placed him in his prime into the UFC today, would he be the heavyweight champion, he responded emphatically, "Oh yeah, without a doubt." He also claims that they wanted to call it the UFC as an homage to him, and the moniker bestowed on him by Vic Moore several years earlier, the Ultimate Fight Champion. But he never appeared in any official capacity for them, and the founders have never confirmed that he was the reasoning for the name being what it was. Anyone who knows the story of UFC 1 knows that it was essentially an advertisement for Gracie Jiu-Jitsu, and if this tournament was built around anyone, it was them. And this is also where we circle back to that Godfather of MMA claim from part 1. It goes without saying that Frank Dux did not invent or popularize cross-training among disciplines, and so that claim is a bit dubious right on its face.
It's a lie. You're a liar.
Now, what is true is that the movie Bloodsport certainly did help to inspire the idea behind UFC 1, and so in that regard, he is not completely full of shit, as he was one of the people responsible for the movie, but he is definitely not a pioneer of mixed martial arts in the way that I'm sure he would like to be known. Certainly not the Godfather, more like the shady next-door neighbor. The bigger, much more unquestionable inspiration that it provided was for the original fighting game boom of the early to mid-90s, specifically Mortal Kombat, with the character of Johnny Cage being a direct homage to Jean-Claude Van Damme in Bloodsport.
Aren't you a little old for video games?
Despite getting his clock cleaned in public, Frank says that this was actually a blessing in disguise because the ensuing medical visits and the scans caused from this would be what led to the discovery of a massive brain tumor. During this time, Dux lost use of one side of his body and had problems with his vision, which explains the eye patch in interviews around this time and his signature use of sunglasses going forward. He also claimed the memory loss that was caused from this as part of his defense when it comes to remembering details of his accomplishments, and uses it almost as a get-out-of-jail-free card when challenged to the contrary. There's been speculation from some that Frank did not have a brain tumor and that he was really suffering from the effects of the Frazier beating instead. As a survivor of childhood cancer myself, I am not going to speculate or accuse anyone of this. You're free to make up your own mind. Things sort of start to fall apart for Frank though personally at this time, as he suffers a string of unfortunate events. Some of his schools were forced to shut down, his wife at the time filed for divorce, but the most damaging moment of Frank's entire career, in my opinion, is in March of 1996 when he releases his book, The Secret Man: An American Warrior's Uncensored Story. Again, guys, similar to like I said in the previous video with the Black Dragons and Count Dante, to be honest, I could likely spend another entire video delving into Frank Dux' memoir of his apparent Cold War era covert missions that read like a Tom Clancy novel, but since we're already approaching the limit of anyone's toleration of me in one sitting, the abridged version is going to have to do here. Essentially, Frank alleges he was approached in 1981 at a public restroom urinal by a guy introducing himself as, quote, the fucking head of the CIA, William Casey. Evidently, Director of Central Intelligence Casey knew Dux' father and personally selected him for the task of bringing down former agents who had gone rogue. Casey would be Dux' personal handler, and this would all have to be done in a way to keep it completely secret from absolutely everyone else in the agency. This is why he is not, as he puts it, a card-carrying member of the agency. The book then traces what amounts to 8 of Frank's missions as a CIA secret agent from 1981 to 1987, such as destroying fuel tanks in Nicaragua, being the lone survivor of a 5-man team sent into Iran during the height of its war with Iraq to destroy a chemical weapons plant, and being part of a joint CIA-KGB task force assigned to investigate a 1979 Russian anthrax disaster. The book also contains in its foreword what would seemingly be an endorsement from retired Navy Commander Larry Simmons, who headed SEAL Team 5, lending it a bit of authenticity. However, there were some real issues that presented shortly after its release when several members of the military spoke out against the validity of the book, including General Norman Schwarzkopf, former Director of Central Intelligence Robert Gates, and the man who wrote the book's foreword, Larry Simmons. Simmons went into writing military adventure novels after he retired, and as it turns out, shared the same literary agent with Frank Dux at the time the book was due to be released. Simmons says that he was contacted by his agent and asked as a favor to write a generic foreword for the book, which he did sight unseen. When it came out, Simmons says, "Within reading the first few pages, I knew that I had been deceived into lending credibility to a fraudulent endeavor. Frank Dux is not an American hero. He is a con man." Dukes' alleged contact, DCI Bill Casey, passed away before the book was published, and so he was never able to say his piece on the matter, but it is pretty obvious to most everyone that even if Frank was a secret operative, the idea of Casey being his sole handler is preposterous. The DCI's duties are such that there is simply no way for them to be involved in the rigmarole of one particular operative's assignment, since, they're in charge of the whole agency. There is something genuinely funny to me, though, about the thought of Frank Dux being at a urinal and being approached by some crazy dude just claiming to be the head of the CIA and then conning Frank for years into thinking he was an operative.
You have been compromised. Abort mission. Destroy phone. Destroy phone.
Anyway, after enough holes had been punched in the story that it was undeniable they had to do something, publisher HarperCollins was forced to pull the book from the shelves just weeks after its release, which Frank still maintains was his choice. He would be interviewed by Soldier of Fortune magazine in an effort to give him a chance to explain his side of things for what would be an article in their August 1996 issue titled Full Mental Jacket, and they would be absolutely merciless in their examination of his stories. They cover the missions I mentioned earlier and the reasons why they just don't add up, and for the sake of time, I won't rehash those, but go check it out when you get done here if you want to hear more about these. Frank also appears in their November 98 article about Stolen Valor. He would of course sue them, and he would of course lose this case. Speaking of Stolen Valor, this term was popularized in a 1998 book by the same title by retired Army officer B.G. Burkett, who examines high-profile cases of individuals who are accused of falsifying their military records, and Frank is one of the subjects of this book. Frank says the sheer fact that the CIA acknowledged it to officially deny it is proof enough of its existence, and while that is unusual for them to do, it's also incredibly unusual for a somewhat celebrity figure with a sizable audience to come out and make easily verifiably false claims. With the help of the Freedom of Information Act, it wasn't long before the public started attaining Frank's real military records, which, unsurprisingly to most, showed a very different story. Frank Dux served as a member of the Marine Reserves from 1975 to 1981. He would have performed the standard one weekend a month that reserve members are required to fulfill, but certainly not a full-time soldier. His role in the reserves was that of a wireman, or a person who strings communication wire between poles. Many intelligence experts have pointed out that the prospective operatives would not have been plucked from training like this. It simply does not work that way, and that honestly, Frank would have had nothing to offer to warrant such recruiting. He would receive a Class 3 status listing on May 8, 1978, and in the book Stolen Valor, it states, "In May 1978, Dux fell from a truck in the motor pool while painting the vehicle." The Class 3 transfer would appear to have made Dux ineligible to perform active duty, and he would have been in the inactive reserve until the end of his contract in 1981. His records show no medals or commendations, no overseas assignments, but they do show a January 22, 1978 referral for psychiatric evaluation due to flighty and disconnected ideas. But of course, these were evidently purposely fudged by the military to discredit him. If you ask Frank for proof of these claims, well, he will point you to the United States Navy SEAL CFC Spec War Manual K 43100097, which is the handbook for the Naval Special Warfare Combat Course. In it, there is a special thanks section listing names who contributed to the courses, and Frank's name is listed there. He has used this as his mic drop of legitimacy for a very long time at this point, and to those who aren't in the know, this obviously sounds very official and legit. However, an inside source who worked with Frank during this training course has confirmed that he taught a very, very limited number of techniques using edged and impact weapons, and his contributions may or may not have been used after the session. In reality, the tactics used in the close quarter defense's hand-to-hand combat training comes from a man named Dwayne Dieter. And if you look at the list of the rest of the names, you might also see Horian and Hoist Gracie's names listed there as well. So I suppose this proves their status as covert operatives as well. If you're wondering, just like I was, how someone like Frank could end up teaching tactics to soldiers, I will defer you to ex-Special Forces operative Chris Flynn's explanation. Today, right now, this very second, if you wanted to, you could literally call up to the Special Operations Department at Fort Bragg and offer your services to train Special Forces. And they are, more than likely, going to welcome you with open arms because that's the kind of people they are. They always like to bring in new stuff, and so if you have something new to offer that will be of some benefit, they're going to take it. So it's not unheard of for people to say that they went over and taught Special Forces, Navy SEALs, Green Berets, etc. It happens all the time. You can literally go to Fort Bragg and talk to the Sergeant Major and say, hey, I'm a badass and this is what I know, and I'd like to show it to your soldiers. And not only will he probably let you do it, afterwards, he will probably write you a nice letter talking about your contributions to whatever group, and you would leave with your letter in hand and you can go home and put it on your shelf or whatever. Viking Samurai did a whole interview with Chris, and he extensively breaks down how Frank's story is just simply not plausible. I highly recommend that as well. For more info, if you haven't seen it, I will link the video in the description. In my opinion, though, the most damning piece of evidence from the secret man lies on this page, where a picture of Frank appears with the caption, "Down in the trenches in 1983, the 357 Magnum was the sidearm that distinguished special unit personnel." Many at the time pointed out the rifle in the photo with him is a .22 long rifle and asked why a covert CIA operative would be equipped with something akin to hunting small animals. Even as recent as 2011, Frank was defending this picture on his Facebook account, stating, "The rifle, it's not mine, but the 357 Magnum is, issued to SEAL Team 6 and other specialized anti-terror operators in the 1980s. I was not a SEAL, but grateful that they thought enough about what I contributed from my experience and studies to list me as a source contributor in their manual, page 10. The problem with this picture is that while it was taken in the trenches, they were the trenches of Camp Pendleton, being used to film the 1983 movie Firefight, which we can see here. Same outfit, same hairstyle, same place, same old Dukes.
You lie!
What is, in my opinion, though, the most egregious of Frank's claims over the years is the claims of being a Medal of Honor recipient. Now, mentions of him having received a Medal of Honor and a host of others, including the Navy Cross, Silver Star, Bronze Star, and Purple Heart, have appeared in several articles, including a lot of the ones that we mentioned earlier. And some of them have alleged that in the early days, anytime he was confronted with evidence to counter his claim, he would pivot and say this was all, of course, done in secret, and there would be no record of it. Nowadays, Frank denies that he has ever made the claim to have received a Medal of Honor, and these are just lies being fabricated by his enemies to attack his image. He insists that he would never make a claim so easily fact-checked to come up false, but it wasn't so easy to do so back then, and if you stuck to making these claims outside of people who were in the know, it was very hard to prove false, and the gravity of such claims gives most people the benefit of the doubt. Well, surely they would never lie about that, right?
They gave you the Congressional Medal of Honor.
This isn't the first time medals he supposedly won have raised concerns. There is this picture of him with several medals that many have pointed out are from multiple branches of the military and that they are wrong sequentially and wouldn't appear that way. Frank explains this away by saying this is a well-known photo of him before he went to a costume party when he was still in college, and it is used as another tool to discredit him. Then there is the Sheldon Lettich story, who claims Frank personally not only told him he won the Medal of Honor, but showed him one that he had in his possession. Sheldon Lettich had actually seen combat during the Vietnam War and stated that it was believable to him that Frank had actually been there also. Sheldon says that he wasn't really skeptical yet of Frank, having no reason to be, and so he just believed it. He says it wasn't until later, talking to some military folks with a book of previous Medal of Honor winners who questioned this, that he himself began to as well. Frank shockingly says this never occurred and that this is just another of Sheldon's lies. The problem is Sheldon isn't the only one who has come forward with this sort of tale, and it would seem as though enough legit people have called him out as having told them or someone that they know that he was awarded a Medal of Honor that this just screams of Frank covering his bases on a fact that he never thought he would be checkmated on.
You lie! You're a fucking liar! Shut up!
Unfortunately for Frank, the hits kept on coming. Remember that script for Enter the New Dragon? Well, it had undergone some rewrites with a couple of new people brought in, and it was working under the new title, The Quest. This was released on April 26, 1996, and it ended up being a cult favorite amongst Van Damme's catalog of films. However, Frank says that he noticed that the finished product looked far too similar to Enter the New Dragon, and that all he received was a story by credit rather than credit as the writer. He also alleges that at one point while recovering from brain surgery, and when those in the room thought he was not conscious to have heard, Sheldon Lettich was on the phone making plans to cut him out of it, which is just a ridiculous visual if you really think it over. Like, even if he were going to take a phone call about plans to screw you out of a movie project while visiting you at the hospital, that he would at least take the phone call outside? If we're being completely honest, The Quest is essentially just a tournament movie like Bloodsport before it. It has a different story written around it, but it centers around a secret martial arts tournament. I remember as a somewhat younger kid when this movie came out thinking that, oh sweet, it'll be like another Bloodsport. And it is a great movie, but it isn't some standout juggernaut of a story that would land you bigger work in Hollywood. But it is very obvious to me anyway that Frank's bigger concern was one thing.
Where's the money? When are you going to get the money? Why aren't you getting the money now? And so on.
Frank sued Van Damme seeking $1.5 million in Van damages. His claim was that Jean-Claude had offered him $50,000 for his writing, and then points on the final movie where he could make the real money. Frank also claimed to have secretly tape recorded Jean-Claude when he said this, and that he could have proved it, but that the tapes were in his apartment when it was condemned from the Northridge earthquake in 1994, and he was not allowed entry in to get them, and that by the time he was, they had been stolen. The lawsuit obviously drove a wedge between Frank and his on-screen betrayer, and in the middle of it was Sheldon Lettich, with both jockeying for his support. Sheldon claims to have done his best to stay out of it, and that while Frank was making valid points to his case, that he lost his jury when he went off the rails making outrageous statements to the effect of Jean-Claude being jealous of Frank for dating the sister of his current wife Gladys Portuguese, and that Van Damme really wanted her for himself. Sheldon says that this was the tipping point for him, and when he told Frank that he should not have done that, the two had a heated argument, and that was the last of what remained of their friendship as they went their separate ways. For what it's worth, I do believe that Van Damme made these promises to Frank, and even Sheldon Lettich has been quoted as saying that Jean-Claude told some lies on the stand as well, and that he likely did offer that because he would offer stuff like that all the time in passing when talking about projects and then forget about it later. There is also this piece from his time on the stand that was ultimately ruled inadmissible by the judge.
That Mr. Dukes had a piece of the back door on the movie. Yes or no?
Another piece.
Yes or no?
Back door, it's a different expression. I mean, no.
You didn't say that to him.
Yes, I said it, but I mean, can I expand myself?
I'm
Because
just asking if you said it.
it's like,
Don't be frustrated.
I'm not frustrated.
It didn't matter though, as Frank lost in court again, and then moved away from the Hollywood scene shortly after. In true Frank Dukes fashion though, even when he deserves a win, he has to go and totally unredeem himself. Frank's involvement with the Quest apparently extended to, for a time, claiming to be the fight coordinator for the movie as well. And as the story has been told, one day he was asserting that claim at a luncheon gathering to a gentleman sitting at his table, not realizing that the man he was talking to was Stephen Lambert, the actual fight coordinator for the movie. After Frank received a tongue lashing from Lambert, he says he promptly left, and that had to have just been amazing. Anyway guys, after this, Van Damme continued making movies and had a serious roller coaster of a career in Hollywood, culminating with somewhat of a resurgence since he appeared as the villain in The Expendables 2. He has remade some of his classics, and there has been rumblings several times of a Bloodsport relaunch. In fact, there is a Kickstarter project out there gaining funding for a movie called The Last Kumite, and even though it doesn't involve Jean-Claude, I am very excited to see where it goes. And I have it on good authority, this is not the last time we will be talking about the muscles from Brussels, so I will stop there. Sheldon Lettich would go on to become a successful screenwriter, having a hand either writing or directing movies like Rambo 3, Only the Strong, and several Van Damme favorites like Lionheart and Double Impact. He pops up from time to time in interviews on YouTube, and he has a recent book out called From Vietnam to Van Damme that has a lot of extra info you should check out if you want to know even more. Frank would move to Washington State and would continue teaching students, although the last record of a school that I could find was a place called Tiger Rock Academy in Mill Creek, Washington, and it appears to be operating as something else now. That didn't stop many people from adopting his fast Dukes Roost system and using it as their own base of teaching, as there are still many schools that purport to do so, and Frank has many people willing to fervently defend him as well. He does still teach privately and give seminars to any law enforcement or military group that will have him, and outside of some interviews here and there, he has mostly kept quiet since leaving Hollywood. Quiet except of course for a very active Facebook page that he consistently uses as a base of operations for his war against his enemies like Sheldon Lettich, Don the Dragon Wilson, Stephen K. Hayes, pretty much anyone who disputes his claims. And so here goes my ultimate plea to Frank. We don't care anymore even if it is all bullshit. Truly, Frank, most of us don't. This is a fantastic story and you are clearly a gifted writer. It will suck, you will have to eat some shit from some people and take some L's on the chin worse than any Kumite strike, but let's be honest, man, you've been doing that anyway. Admit it's all exaggerated or untrue. Be honest with everyone and be honest with yourself. However, that's probably not going to happen. It's vastly more likely that I'll get sued by Frank for defamation, as he has seemingly traded in the dim mock in favor of his new favorite finishing move, the threat of a lawsuit. At this point though, Frank is essentially the Glass Joe of the litigious world, so I like my chances. It should stand to reason that a lot of what has been said over the course of the last two videos is educated speculation based on extensive research, and some of it is just my opinion.
That's my opinion!
And if somehow by miracle you are watching this, Frank, I want to refer you to your own words. Just because the truth hurts, it does not equate to hate. The movie created from the story you somehow surmised is absolutely iconic at this point. So many people cite Bloodsport as the inspiration for them to get into martial arts, and you do deserve to be recognized for that. So in that aspect, we thank you. But again, cut the bullshit.
I'm tired of your double talk.
My analysis is that I think Frank is a smart guy who understood that he never lived up to the potential that he wanted for himself, and so he decided to fake it till he made it. He just never made it in the way that he wanted, and he discovered faking it is easier. I think he truthfully has convinced himself of his story's authenticity to such a degree that he is able to easily convince others. And if you've watched episode 1 on the social network, then you'll know that you just really didn't have the ability in the 80s to fact check a bullshitter like Frank Dux on the internet, and so it was just easier in general to con someone back then into thinking that you were an undefeated, super secret, underground world Kumite deathmatch grand champion who could kill you with one touch and who slept with like 5,000 ladies. And to his credit, it appears that he is somewhat of a legit martial artist and a solid fight choreographer. But as far as his one-on-one fighting abilities, personally, I think even in his prime and peak physical and technical best, I could probably name 40 to 50 people off the top of my head that could stomp him in a real fight. And I'm not even referring to the UFC fighters that just flashed across the screen just now. I'm talking about just people I've known over the course of my life.
No!
Rough on him now.
No, he needs to know.
Okay.
He's always crying.
Tough love it is, tough love. Wake up, idiot!
I'll even go one further and say that it's a bit sad when the person cast to play you in your movie is a more accomplished martial artist than you are. And if they wanted to really be true to life, a better casting choice might have been Sensei Steven Seagal.
Well, I'm sorry to hear that. Because now, I will snatch every motherfucker birthday.
I can admit that there were times throughout this that he even almost had me fooled with certain things for a bit of time. That's how good he is. He has shameless confidence paired with a quick, responsive, and well-researched mind, and he is able to find the smallest amounts of truths in details and make them work to fit his narrative. This lends itself well to getting people to buy into what you're selling. He's a man who fell in love with his own legend, but this legend is ultimately like the epitome of the old saying, what doesn't come out in the wash will come out in the rinse. That's gonna wrap it up, everybody. What did you think? Did I slay my white whale, or is this simply destined to be one of my own personal guilty pleasures?
Son of a bitch. It's not good enough, guys.
If you enjoyed the video, please do all the things to all the buttons and check us out on the socials to stay up to date. We also have a Patreon now if you would like to support this channel. There is only one tier, which is $2, and in return, I will give you perks like a producer credit. Ooh, fancy. And in the future, I plan to add things like early access and the ability to vote on the next video as well. We're a small outfit here, and so every little bit helps and is appreciated.
Give me a quarter, $5, anything. People, we need your money.
With that said, allow me to leave you with the real post-credits that Frank truly deserves. Thank you for watching. See you next time.
wants me dire, and I will sue you for slander and libel. It's a secret, not all that I've done, but I'm like Bruce Lee and James Bond in one. I'm taking notes on other stories, switch some things around and call them mine. I'm gonna make my claims, I like to survive. Dukes' way, 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 Dukes' way. I've researched all the places and names, so I'm prepared to exaggerate. Find somebody to partake in my schemes. I've never met people I've already been. I'm making up, I'm telling stories, and if I'm ever caught, I'll just deny I ever made that claim. I like to survive. Dukes' way, 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 Dukes' way.
A recent book out called From Vietnam to Van Damme. From Vietnam to Van Damme. Oh my god. That's the blooper right there. Fuck.